Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and good morning to our beloved lecturer, Dr. Rosli bin Ahmad and all class member. Okay, today our group will present about pilot test and terrorist test reliability. Okay, before we start our presentation, okay, I want to introduce my group member. The first presenter is me, Nur Abida binti Ayub. The second presenter is Mr. Sharifuddin, and the last presenter is Mr. Nazir. This is our content overview. We divide into three parts. The first part we cover by myself. The second part we cover by second presenter, Mr. Saifuddin, and the last part we cover by Mr. Nazir. The term pilot test is used in two different ways in social science research, whether in qualitative or quantitative research. A pilot test is a small-scale preliminary study conducted in order to evaluate the feasibility, time, cost, adverse event, and effect size in an attempt to predict an appropriate sample size and improve upon the study design prior to the performance of a full-scale research project. A pilot test can involve pre-testing a research tool like a new data collection method. It can also be used to test an idea or hypothesis. Pilot tests are used as a feasibility study to ensure that the idea or method behind a research idea are sound, as well as to work out the kind or solve the problem in a study protocol before launching a larger or actual study. A pilot test is very necessary for a study. In a certain cases, without a pilot test, the whole actual study or research is invalid and unreliable. Therefore, pilot tests are very important and can affect the validity and the reliability of the study as a whole, while ensure the implementation of the actual study can be carried out smoothly. Is objective of pilot test is to identify weaknesses arising from the design of the actual study conduct in a limited state control. Okay, the second to gather information prior to a large study. Okay, then to improve the actual study quality and efficiency, and then to revive deficiency in the design of a proposal experiment or procedure, and this can then be addressed before the time. Okay, the last one is to be a good research strategy require careful plan, and a pilot test will often be a part of this strategy. This is the administration process for a pilot test. This process is as a guideline during a good pilot test. In a pilot test, the sampling, instrument, data collection, data analysis, and validity must be considered. The first is sampling. The pilot test must be done to over a sample that is representative of the target population. Sample for subsequent pilot tests should be selected using the same or similar method as those required for the final survey. Okay, however, one exception must be made about this. Okay, in order to avoid the study of the same respondents in the both the pilot test and the final survey, sample for the pilot test and the final survey can be selected at the same time to avoid any undesirable probabilities. Okay, this can be done and carried out using two-way method. Okay, the first one, the researcher can select the final sample or the first sample unit and select the pilot test sample from the rest of population, or the researcher can select a starting sample that contain sufficient element for the sample and subsample for the list for the pilot test. Okay, the general rule of thumb is to the pilot test service on 30 to 100 pilot respondents. The pilot test must involve the administration of a research instrument that is almost identical or similar to the required for the final survey. If any previous description is to be used, the researcher must be clear or understand that it may not be possible to produce the figure need for the pilot test and subsequent produce a review group for the final survey. Okay, the questionnaire for the pilot study or pilot test must contain question in the form of word, format and sequence of initial test that indicate it's good to use in the final survey. A pilot test should not be a motivator for the trying new item that have not yet passed initial testing. However, there is one exception that is necessary for the pilot test instrument to contain more questions than required to be included in the final survey. Okay, like other piece of a pilot test, data collection and data analysis must be minimized when going through the final survey. It will continue up the point where research instrument can be compared and the data obtained are administered as required for the final survey. Okay, in the event of differences, the researcher must be aware of the implication of the different encounter in addition to existing experience. Okay, in addition, a complete questionnaire must be coded and the data obtained must be entered, transferred, cleaned and analyzed as a plan for the final research. Successful conduct research must begin with a draft written report. Okay, the written report must contain argument which respect to logical study, hypothetical table or blank table. A systematic researcher will ascertain any information that is a need, from who it is a need and from where it is a need. As with the final analysis, the analysis for the pilot test must contain blank empirical feeling, marking of unexpected development and a description of those development. Okay, the analysis of the pilot test must also touch with respect to the resource of energy and imagination required for the final analysis. Since the sample of the pilot test is described with the intent to be representative of the target pollution, the result of the analysis of the pilot test must be the same as a final survey. This is important so that the result of the final analysis will be a more accurate copy for those of the initial analysis. An item can only be evaluated through a measurement between the correlation with other item. Okay, what need to be taken into account in making a pilot test is the needs to measure the isolation for some item. The evaluation function of the pilot test was to determine whether each item presented was meaningful or otherwise. Okay, if the evaluation for each item is in the same position among the respondents, then the answer for each item should have a correlation with the other answer. Typically, most items construct not only to measure the empirical validity of each other, but a strong relationship should also be equated in the item. If an item is weak, then it cannot measure validity and it should be dropped from the questionnaire. However, all items cannot be removed entirely. It should be determined in advance fits a background. Example, the question for the item can explain a different dimension of validity, not empirical but has a conceptual significance where it lack in a interesting decomposition relationship and make a final observation. A high correlation between two items is suggested where there is no need to take into account the last two questionnaire. Discard one or more items to be stored in the space where they should be used for the pilot test item of the questionnaire form. This is the advantages of the pilot test. Okay, the first one is carry out before the last scale quantitative research in an attempt to avoid time and money being wasted on an inadequately designed project. Okay, the second one is potentially valuable insight, and should anything be missing in the pilot test, it can be added to the full scale experiment to improve the chance of the clear outcome. The third one, pilot experiment used to sell a product and provide quantitative proof that the system has potential to success on a full-scale basis. In social science, the pilot test can be referred to as a small-scale study that will help identify design issue before the main research is done. Okay, the next, it permit preliminary testing of the hypothesis that lead to testing more precise hypothesis in the main study. It may lead to changing some hypothesis, dropping some, or developing a new hypothesis. Okay, the next is often provide the researchers with idea, approach, and a clue you may not have foreseen before conduct the pilot test. It permits a thorough check of the plan, statistical and analytical procedure, giving you a chance to evaluate their usefulness of the data. You may then be able to make a needed alteration in the data collecting method, and therefore analyze data in the main study more efficiently. Okay, the next, it can gently reduce the number of unanticipated problem because you have an opportunity to redesign part of your study to overcome difficulties that pilot test revive. Okay, the last one, okay, in the pilot test, the researcher may try out a number of alternative measures and then select those that produce the clearest result for the main study. Successful pilot test does not necessarily ensure the successful of the full study. There are a number of concerns that are not addressed in the pilot test, and some issue may not arise until the full-scale study in conduct. It is important to be aware of the this problem before they arise. Okay, this is limitation in a pilot test. Okay, the first one is the pilot test is done on a small scale. Thus, actual result of the study may vary from the result of a pilot test. Okay, pilot test therefore may not be appropriate for the case study. Okay, the next, a pilot test is normally a small in a comparison with the main experiment, and therefore can provide only limited information on the source and magnitude of the variation of response measure. And the last one is a pilot test is usually carried out on member of the relevant population, but not only those who will form part of the final sample. Okay, that's all my presentation today about pilot test. I hope you all can understand what I explained just now. If you all have any question, we will discuss after the end of my group presentation. Okay, without further ado, I will invite our second presenter to continue the topic of test retest reliability. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to my honorable lecturer Dr. Rosli and my beloved friend in the class this morning. Thank you to Puan Abida for presentation just now. I will continue my group presentation today with a topic, the next topic, test retest reliability. Test retest reliability. Reliability is one of the most important elements of the test quality. For example, if you were to administer a test with high reliability to an examinee on 2 occasions, you will be very likely to reach the same conclusion about the examinee's performance both times. A test with poor reliability, on the other hand, might result in very different score from the examinee across the 2 test administration. If a test yield inconsistent score, it may be unethical to take any sustained action on the basis of the test. It has to do with the consistency or reproducibility of an examinee's performance on the test. Test retest method of the determine reliability is accomplished by administering a test to a group. After a period of time has passed, the same test is re-administered to the same group. It is also now a stability reliability, consistent score across time. It is used in both qualitative and quantitative research. Qualitative require a different technique of analysis. Next slide. When we talk about reliability coefficient, after 2 tests have been administered, a reliability coefficient is calculated to determine the relationship between the 2 scores obtained. If the same results are obtained from the 2 tests, then the coefficient equal 1.0. The coefficient is influenced by the amount of the time that has passed between the administration of the 2 tests. Next slide. When we talk about reliability coefficient measurement, the reliability coefficient is expected to be lower the longer the time interval between the tests due the possibility of change in the population taking the test. The shorter, that means the shorter the time gap, the higher the correlation. The longer the time gap, the lower the correlation. Now we discuss about consistency. In the description of test retest and parallel form reliability, the consistency or dependability of the test score was emphasized. For many criterion reference tests, a more useful way to think about reliability may be in terms of examining classification. For example, a typical CRT will result in an examinee being classified as either a master or non-master. The examinee will either pass or fail the test. Is it the reliability of this classification decision that is estimated in decision consistency reliability? If an examinee is classified as a master on both test administration or as a non-master of both occasions, the test is producing consistent decision. The approach can be used either with parallel form or with a single form administered twice in the retest fashion. Now we go to next slide. From this slide, we talk about construct validity. Construct validity require the presence of both convergent and discriminant validity. Examining discriminant validity between any two rating equations relies on bivariate correlation as well as the reliability estimate of each question. Meaning that given that the retest did not yield a sufficient number of survey, discriminant validity cannot be reported. Okay, we go to the next slide. Now we discuss about topic basic type of validity. From our presentation, we have listed three of basic type of validity. First, we call face validity. Is the extent to which a measurement method appear on its face to measure the construct of interest. Most people will expect a self-esteem questionnaire to include items about whether they see themselves as a person or worth and whether they think they have good qualities. So, a questionnaire that include this kind of item will have good face validity. Second, about basic type of validity, what we call content validity. Is the extent to which a measure cover the construct of interest. For example, if a researcher conceptually defines test anxiety as involving both sympathetic nervous system activation and negative thought, then its measure of test anxiety should include items about both nervous feeling and negative thought, or consider that attitudes are usually defined as involving thought, feeling, and action towards something. By the conceptual definition, a person has a positive attitude toward exercise to the extent that he or she thinks positive thought about exercising, feels good about exercising, and actually exercise. So, to have good content validity, a measure of people's attitudes toward exercise will have to reflect all three of these aspects. And the third basic type of validity, we talk about criterion validity. Is the extent to which people score and measure are correlated with others variable, now as that one will expect them to be correlated with. For example, people score on a new measure of test anxiety should be negatively correlated with their performance on an important school exam. Now, I will pass the presentation to my clique member, Cikgu Nazir, to be continue the presentation, my group presentation now. That's all from me. Thank you for everyone.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, my colleagues, Encik Ahmad Sharifuddin and Puan Navidah. Okay, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Rosli and friends. Good morning to Pradeep and Mr. Utaya. Alright, I will continue my presentation on criterion related validity. Alright, the first one is also called concrete validity criterion validity refers to a test correlation with a concrete outcome. For example, a company could administer a sales personality to test its sales after sales staff to see if there is an overall correlation between their test scores and a measure of their productivity. Okay, the second one, criterion validity is a method of test validation that examines the extent to which scores on an inventory or scale correlate with external non-test criteria. Okay, the next one. Okay, to measure a criterion validity of a test, researchers must calibrate it against a known standard or against itself. Comparing the test with an established measure is known as concurrent validity. Testing over a period of time is known as predictive validity. Okay, the next one, the fourth. There are three main types of validity. The first one is construct validity. Does test measure the concept of its intent to measure? Okay, I'm here. Okay, content validity is the test fully representative of what it aims to measure. And then criterion validity, do the tests correspond to a different test of same thing? Alright, okay, next slide. Okay, test retest issues. Okay, there are a lot of issues doing test retest. Okay, antara isu-isu dia adalah, okay, there cannot be any measurable change in the construct being measured between the two tests. Okay, kat sini membawa maksud bahawa tidak boleh ada dua perkara yang diukur ataupun konstruk yang diukur diubah dalam dua test yang akan dijalankan. Alright, jadi bila kita jalankan test tadi tu, kita tak boleh ubah konstruk dia. Okay, this method will not work when measuring a variable that is not stable in individual. Okay, method test retest ni dia tidak boleh diukur jika variable ini tidak stable dalam individu-individu tersebut. Okay, yang ketiga, unless the instrument is reliable, relationship with the other variable in the study will not be identified. Okay, nombor 4, requires twice data collection. Ni yang dekat sini, twice data collection. Why? Sebab kita nak buat test lagi sekali. So ada dua test. So bila responden kita ataupun klien-klien kita yang telah menjawab soal selidik kita tadi tu, kita perlu dapatkan baliklah data collection daripada mereka-mereka ni. Dapatkan balik data-data daripada mereka ni buat kali kedua. Sebab yang kali pertama tadi tu ada masalah. Okay, itu isu dia. Alright, the next slide. The test retest issues. Population for the test would need to be willing to repeat the test in practical. Okay, maksudnya populasi ataupun responden yang kita gunakan tadi tu, walaupun dalam populasi yang kecil, mereka perlulah berterbuka hati ataupun berterbukaan dengan menjawab soal selidik ini mungkin dalam kali kedua. Okay, mereka kena dengan hati yang terbuka menjawab soalan-soalan tadi tu. Okay, sebab dekat sini isu dia adalah ada kalanya kali pertama mereka menjawab, jawapan dia sebegini. Kali kedua jawapan mereka sebegini. Jadi kalau anda kata masih lagi tidak berhati dengan jawapan-jawapan tadi tu, kemungkinan besar data kita tadi tu akan dibatalkan ataupun kita tidak gunakan data mereka. Alright, the next, higher cost due to multiple tests being administered. Okay, maksudnya bila kita menjalankan testing lebih daripada sekali, cost kita akan meningkat. Okay, cost kita akan meningkat. Pelbagai jenis lah. Alright. Okay, yang ketujuh, only works when practical. Better for smaller population rather than large one. Okay, maksudnya kita lebih baik untuk test retest ataupun pilot test ni kita menggunakan dalam populasi yang kecil. Okay, the small population. Alright. Okay. The next last one, researchers may not be able to retest the same community ataupun same population. Okay, researchers mungkin ada masalah, dia tidak dapat menjalankan test tadi tu dalam populasi yang sama. Alright, itu isu dia. Alright. Okay. Contoh-contoh test retest tadi dalam bidang apa? Okay, educational assessment, okay, drug testing, okay, testing measurement equipment, and then medical evaluation. Ni bahagian bidang-bidang yang kita selalunya kita buat test retest lah. Alright. Okay. Yang terakhir, conclusion for me and my group. Okay, test reliability is the aspect of test quality concerned with whether or not a test produce consistent result. Okay, maksud dekat sini menunjukkan bahawa test reliability ni dia kita kena ubah sehingga kita mendapatkan result yang konsisten. Okay, mungkin 2 kali atau 3 kali setelah kita mendapat result yang lebih konsisten. Okay, there are several methods for estimating test reliability. For objective CRTs, the most useful type are probably test-retest reliability, parallel forms reliability, and decision must be consistency. Okay, mesti konsisten. Tak boleh tak konsisten. Alright, yang seterusnya, a type of reliability that is more useful for NRTs is internal consistency. Okay, pendalaman ni mesti kena lebih konsisten. For the performance-based tests and other tests that are human raters, internal raters likely to be the most appropriate method. Okay, jadi benda ni mesti kena ada human yang rates. Kita tak boleh menggunakan secara tidak ada manusia yang buat lah, sebab dia ada pengalaman dan menjalankan tu. Okay, jadi itu saja daripada saya. So ini adalah antara bahan-bahan yang kita telah buat rujukan. Alright, dan terima kasih. Sekiranya ada soalan nanti kita boleh tanya di kelas ya. Okay, terima kasih. Assalamualaikum. Thank you very much.